Hello, Booktube. All right, we're here for part 2 of our 8.1K Q&A, and we are up to Joel Swagman, Crisis on Infinite Earth. Oh no, he has a batch of questions on Crisis on Infinite Earth. All right, for those of you who need being brought up to speed just briefly, DC Comics, the publisher of real superheroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, The Flash, Aquaman, Hawkman, the Justice League, the Legion of Superheroes. At one point, what was it, 40 years ago, they decided that their continuity, the long record of issues that various writers and artists had done over the decades, was too complicated. And that what they needed to do was a continuity-wide reboot where they revamped all of that mess into one neat, coherent narrative. Now, this was a disaster, and it was a disaster predictably because its underlying assumption that continuity was too complex to intrigue new readers was wrong. It was the reason why it was a disaster is because it was based on a faulty assumption. The only thing that saved it, even a little, there was a 12-issue miniseries called Crisis on Infinite Earths, in which all of the alternate Earths and alternate dimensions and all of the complex storylines were smoothed out and pruned. The series made national headlines because the writers decided on the spur of the moment to kill Supergirl. They also killed Barry Allen, the Flash, and a bunch of other second, third-rate, fifth-rate characters. And the only thing that salvaged it was that it had great George Perez artwork. But otherwise, oh my. And that's what Joel Swagman is referring to here. Because you don't redo something like that. The continuity in DC Comics is a lamentable mess today, mainly because it was built on the shattered, fragmentary foundations of Crisis on Infinite Earths, instead of just letting things go on. Tell great stories where you can. Anyway, what are your questions here? Was Crisis a necessary change, or did it needlessly ruin DC Comics continuity? No, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't a single comic book fan, new or old, who said, boy, I would buy 10 DC issues a month if this were all much more simple. There wasn't a single comics fan who did that. The old ones loved it, and the new ones relished the challenge of finding out all these different variations. What is the difference between Earth 2 and Earth 3? What is Earth 1? All that sort of stuff. They relished the challenge. There wasn't anybody. It was a decision made by corporate bean counters who thought, well, I looked at an issue from 1951, and I couldn't make head or tails of it, so let's redo this. It was a totally disastrous idea. And what DC really ought to do is just ignore it. I've said this every time DC has gone back and had all sorts of other continuity revamping events since Crisis on Infinite Earths. A lot of them have Crisis in the title. And every single time I have urged, I have a friend who works in Hollywood and knows people who work at Disney that now owns DC Comics. I have urged anybody that I could get to listen to me. I have urged what DC needs to do for its next continuity revamping event is just cancel all the others. Pre-Crisis, you could call it PC. Anyway, or to put the same question in another way, is DC Comics richer for having one coherent continuity stretching back to the 1940s, or is it better to press the reset button every few years as they've been doing? They did have one continuity stretching back to the 1940s. They had multiple continuities. It isn't a good idea for them to do it because no fans liked it. New ones knew that they were getting adulterated garbage and being talked down to, and old ones hated the fact that wholesale destruction was done that doesn't make any sense. The end results of Crisis on Infinite Earths didn't make any sense. And that was obvious right from the beginning, because at the very beginning of, right after Crisis on Infinite Earths reached issue number 12 and ended, where were things left? You had some characters remembering that the crisis had happened and that once upon a time there had been a multiverse, others not remembering. And you knew perfectly well, even back then in the 1980s, you knew perfectly well that a few years would pass and some writer would come along and propose an alternate Earth, Earth 2, or Earth 3, or Earth 4. You knew that it would happen, that it wasn't permanent. Anyway, do you miss the old Earth 2, or are we better off without it? Of course I miss it. Of course I miss it. What about the actual Crisis on Infinite Earth miniseries itself? Does it have any value as an actual story? The story is a mess. Once upon a time, you'll never be able to find this, but once upon a time there was a great, I don't know, it must have been a 6,000-word takedown of the story of Crisis on Infinite Earths in the old comic book journal Amazing Heroes. And oh my God, it was a joy to read. a joy. The writer of the piece went through each issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths and just tore it apart. From a plot perspective, just tore it apart. So the story doesn't hang together at all. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The artwork is occasionally very, very good. And of course, DC fanboys, such as myself, got the pleasure of the story sifting out towards the end to the most powerful 24 characters in DC continuity, squaring off against the villain of the piece. That isn't how the story starts. Marv Wolfman started the story off by picking 24 main characters totally at random. And having those characters be told, well, your roles will each be crucial. That's why it's not random that we're picking Dawnstar from the Legion of Superheroes, or Solivar from Gorilla City, or whatever. These characters that obviously weren't going to go the distance. Obviously, you have a universe-crushing bad guy who has ultimate power. What you're going to want is Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Superman, both Superman, Superboy, Supergirl, Mon-El of the Legion of Superheroes, Captain Atom. Obviously, you're going to want your most powerful characters. You knew that it was going to come to that. It was neat to see it happen once it finally did. And any thoughts on the follow-ups, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis? They're all absolutely bad. Sometimes the artwork is fantastic, but DC needs to cut it out. The Crisis on Infinite Earths really started DC and Marvel on the road of having these regular earth-shattering continuity revamping events. And fans hate it. Collectors love it, but fans hate it. They want it just to end. Anyway, Nick Piccirilli says, what are your thoughts on McPherson's Battle Cry of Freedom? It's pretty good. I often see it as a top recommendation for Civil War books, so I'm curious if you think it's deserved or not. No, it is. It's pretty good. One of the reasons why it appears so often on Civil War recommendation lists is because it's only one volume, whereas so much great writing about the American Civil War is multiple volumes. There have been a great many one-volume works that are really, really good. Stonewall in the Valley, for instance, is a classic of Civil War history. But Battle Cry of Freedom, Landscape Turned Red, about Fredericksburg. There's Alan Guelzo did a book just recently, just a few years ago, on Gettysburg. That's great. Anyway, chapter 21 says, what's something you love about living in a pandemic? Oh my. Well, one of the things I love about living in this pandemic is part of loving history the way I do, which is it's always weird and fascinating when you are living in a concentrated piece of history. It's one thing to say, we're living in history because we're living in the internet age, which is a discrete era. There are quite a few people listening to me right now who lived before the internet and have been able to see the seismic changes that it has created in society and is creating. But it's different when it's a very discrete thing. COVID-19 happened in 2020. It happened to 2020. And 2020 reeled and overreacted and underreacted and misreacted and had psychotic reactions. 2021 will be gripping with COVID-19. But 2020 was the year that it happened. Much like Donald Trump forever said, without anyone that he knows ever correcting him, that the Spanish flu epidemic happened in 1917. The Spanish flu epidemic happened in 1918, and that was a discrete thing. I like that. It's a macabre kind of like. I'd rather that it didn't happen or that it was something nice, but nevertheless, that's always fascinating for a fan of history, to know that you are living in a discrete part of history. That history books will say 2020, and I'm in it. And that is something. And another thing that I like about this pandemic, and keep in mind, I wish that it had happened some other way, but another thing that I like about it is the increase in mindfulness among so many people, good-hearted people, normal, ordinary, ethical people, who just got in the natural way of life, consumed with their deadlines and their job and their mortgage and the bills that they maybe are going to have trouble paying, or the quotidian problems of their loved ones or their children or whatnot. You go about that, you do that from month to month, sometimes you do that from year to year, sometimes a decade will pass, and you haven't ever been pulled completely out of yourself and made mindful. And this has done that. When you can't visit your elderly relatives, when you can't visit your elderly parents across town, when you suddenly can't visit them without endangering their life, so you can't go near them, I have, when all the patterns of your life are disrupted, a lot of people have been more mindful. They've been provoked, prompted to more mindfulness. I should really cherish what I have around me because now it's restricted or gone. I like that. I love seeing that in other people, and it's happened to me too. So, let's see here. Nicole F says, "Thanks for your content and being you without any fairy lights or tech competency." Well, I don't have any choice but to be me. But what do you mean, no tech competency? What do you mean by that? I have lots and lots of tech. I love my tech. I'm in the process of acquiring a new piece of tech from New Hampshire. Ted says, "What are your thoughts on Gene Wolfe's work?" I love it. If you haven't read it, you should. Ducky Little Dictum says, "Your thoughts on Ivy Compton Burnett? I struggle with her books like a monk struggles with his libido. I try to stay away, but something always draws me in. But once in, I'm not sure I should have made the effort." Okay, I think you're reading a different Ivory Compton Burnett books than I ever found. I like her. I like her just fine. Star Physics says, "I know you don't love academic philosophy." No, I hate it. It's not just that I don't love it. I hate it. What about related subjects like anthropology, sociology, etc.? Well, the closer you get to the real, the closer you get to something real. Sociology can look at census data. It can look at demographic shifts. It can do real work. And of course, so can anthropology. The closer you get to something real, the more I will pay attention and learn and like. So those things I like. And of course, also archaeology. Right? Here on Booktube, we all have to say that we really love archaeology. And why do we have to do that? Well, because Mark Richardson lives in Vermont, and everybody in Vermont has guns. So we all have to say we love archaeology. Let's see here. Toastwig says, "What is an opinion that you have changed your mind over the years? Not book related, more about your interpretation of the world." One that comes to mind right away is kids. Once upon a time, actually for a long time, I hated kids. Just hated having them anywhere around. I hated, oddly enough, you're all humans, so you won't know what I mean. I hated the way they smelled. And I also hated the way they behaved. I viewed them as enormous wastes of time. And I remember when that changed. It used to be that I worked forever and ever at an old, ratty, big, warehousey bookstore in Downtown Crossing in Boston. It was a great old place with exposed asbestos and hanging wires and damp spots on the carpet and all that sort of stuff. And my information desk was on the first floor. That was my realm. The big information desk on the first floor. And there was a second floor up a flight of stairs that I really didn't like using because I watched how it got built. I didn't trust it at all. And the kids section for that bookstore was up on the second floor. I hardly ever went up there. And if there was a kid's problem, a kid's issue, a kid's recommendation or whatever, I just happily sent the customers up to the second floor. But then that store closed and we all moved to a new Barnes & Noble. New in every sense of the word. Just a new physical plant in a gorgeous glass and steel mall. And that was only one floor. It was one huge floor, as long as a football field. And I ended up spending a lot more time in and near the kids section there. I couldn't just relegate it to another floor. And started to feel different about the kids. And that was like a flower opening. Once that process started, then it just went on. Suddenly, I think being so close to them enough to... sorry, I know the camera is bouncing. It's because Frida has taken to biting my foot. She has taken to biting my foot. I don't know if you can see that. What are you doing? What are you doing? But that started a change that has only continued. I now love kids. I don't know how much of it had to do with Barnes & Noble, but I loved it. That was a change that's happened. Let's see. Babette Marjan says, "Congratulations." Thank you. "I really missed your last week on Booktube series." Yes, everyone says that. Last week on Booktube. I have wrestled with this a lot about that more than anything else. I mean, people like the Presidential Library series very much. Everybody wants starter kits to resume. But Last Week in Booktube gets the most calls. And I've struggled with it on a number of different levels. And I watch so much Booktube in a given week that picking, 15 things to talk about just feels like, I don't know. I need to wrestle with that in the new year. But anyway, what do you have to say about it? But I know you closely follow the activities of the community, and I'm wondering what kind of changes, shifts, and trends did you notice in the last half year on the Booktube community? I noticed one that really bothers me, and it's not just in Booktube. I noticed it all over YouTube, which is the huge invasion of ads. I'm sure you've noticed it yourself if you watch even a little YouTube, just YouTube in general, not Booktube. Ads are everywhere now, absolutely everywhere. You cannot watch, aside from my channel, you cannot watch a video now that doesn't start with at least one ad, usually with one that's not skippable, and then a couple that are, provided you're right there to hit the skip button. And then how many channels do you watch now in 2020 that in 2019 did not have mid-roll ads and now do? Just a huge, huge invasion of ads, to the point where there are channels that I watch, not Booktube channels, but there are channels that I watch where it's no different than what old network TV used to be like, with the rabbit ears and the bad reception, where you get the teaser of the show and then you get ads, and then you get the first block of the show and then you get ads, then you get the second block of the show and then you get ads, to the point where it's no different than that, where it's unwatchable. I watch YouTube largely because it doesn't have that, and that has been a huge invasion. So that was one change, but I've also noticed, I hate to say it, I've noticed that same change on Booktube. Here it's a conscious decision. That's why I hate to say it, because it's a mistake that friends of mine are making, where you'll get somebody who has 1,000 subscribers on their channel, and as soon as they get the green light from Booktube, they'll put ads all over it. And that's bad, and it shouldn't happen. It's contrary to the ethos of this little corner of Booktube where we're all just talking to each other. And I've seen a number of channels that say, well, the ads are for charity. Any money that's generated by them will go to some bookish charity or a local charity in my community or a library charity or whatever. And I always want to say, whenever I see a booktuber say that, I want to say, cut a check. Okay? Cut a check. Yourself. If the charity means that much to you, then cut a check to them for the amount that you want them to have. Don't impose your charitable giving on other people by making them watch ads, especially when those people are your friends. That has been a change in YouTube and Booktube that I haven't liked at all. Not at all. Dawood Gosli says, in addition to a perpetual rhetorical question, why are you so amazing? I don't understand why this channel doesn't have 50 subscribers. I honestly, literally don't understand that. Which doesn't demand an answer. It does demand an answer, not why am I so amazing. The why am I so amazing doesn't demand an answer because the answer is obvious. The bee-sting lips, the snub nose, the square chin, the wavy ink black hair, the come-hither smoldering gaze, the A-frame shoulders, the 8 abs, the dancer's waist, the pillowy pecs. These things are self-evident. But why people watch this channel, don't get me started. I don't know why people watch this channel. I am fascinated by your dislike of philosophy. I hate philosophy. I just dislike it. Oh, you had sliced cucumbers on your pizza? Oh, I dislike that. No, I hate it. I hate it. Does it bother you when, in a work of fiction, the author takes a break from the narrative to start philosophizing about the world and human nature? Yes, it does. Most recently, I experienced this in Of Human Bondage. I liked the narrative and smaller observations, but not the grand philosophical interludes. In other words, do you oppose philosophy as a genre or as a disposition that can ruin other genres too? It can, of course. I don't mind long philosophical digressions in a novel if they come from a distinguishable place, if a character is prone to such things. Then I don't so much mind. But when an author just junks it right into the narrative, oh no, I hate that. BB, my whole point here was to not jostle. And you came in here, you hopped up on the bed, and now all you're doing is jostling. She ignored me. She's very spoiled. Let's see here. Thomas RP says, thoughts on the works of Marilynne Robinson. She is largely a genius. She is, by and large, our best living author. She and I have had disagreements. I've disliked a couple of her books, but by and large, she's amazing. Eric says, are there things that novellas can do or better suited to do than larger works of fiction cannot? Yes, novellas and short stories. And that is the slalom ride, the sleigh ride right to the emotional sucker punch at the end. Novels work on a longer time scale. They work on a more gradual increments to get you powerful reactions. They build on powerful reactions. But novellas and short stories don't. They are the one sitting type thing. And they have that skill where novels inherently can't do that if they're done right. Let's see here. Inspiring Words says, have you read any books by the Cornish-based writer Patrick Gale? Patrick Gale. I don't think so. Baby, you're rattling this camera to death. Why can't you just sit still? Why? Here, why don't you go into the other room? And oh no, you don't want to do that? Oh God. Here. There you go. I'm much better with titles of books than I am with authors' names, but it's not ringing a bell. How are we doing for time? We're fine. Okay. Isaiah Armstrong says, in the past Q&A, you mentioned how you used to teach Hemingway and deconstruct him line by line. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. There will always be a cadre of dude bros, 18 to 25 in the back rows, who would just be, yeah, Hemingway, yeah. They hadn't read him, but they knew they liked him for all the signaling reasons that everybody does like him. They don't ever like him for his prose. They like him for signaling reasons. And they were the most scandalized when I would start to go, all right, let's go at this bit by bit, sentence by sentence. Let's go at this. And once we're done with a Hemingway short story, tearing it apart sentence by sentence, just to make sure that you don't think that I'm just hating that any work of fiction would fail if you did this. What we're going to do is we're going to take a Hemingway short story and disassemble it sentence by sentence and prove what a piece of junk it is. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with the Eudora Welty short story, and you tell me what you think. Almost never failed to win over those back guys to Eudora Welty. But anyway, would you ever be willing to do a Hemingway read-along where each week you deconstruct the chapter? I'll do it if Brian Brookish will join me. A similar question, what do you think of the iceberg theory? The theory that there is a lot more going on underneath the surface that has been attributed to Hemingway's novels. Show it to me. Show it to me. The unseen parts of an iceberg aren't in an alternate dimension. It may be that the tip of the iceberg is the part that's visible above the water, but with the right technology and the right perseverance, you can find the parts under the water. They aren't invisible. They aren't in another dimension. With Hemingway, that is true. So show it to me, and then come here, come up here. Come on, baby. Ah! Oh, wait, now, you're going to sit still, right? You're just going to sit still. No, baby, don't bite me. Ooh, oh. I'm trying to do a Q&A. Oh. Why don't you sit still? You are possessed by a demon. You are. Just sit still. Oh, there's a baby bean. There you go. Oh! Oh, let's see here. Sorry. Sorry for all these Frida interruptions. Let's see here. Laura Wincello says, thanks again for your company on Booktube throughout the year. The feeling's mutual. I don't know what I've done without all of you. I don't know how any of these are coming out. I'm swiveling the tripod, so I don't know how these Frida sightings are coming out. Which in your opinion is the best Disney animated feature pre-2000, pre the 2000 Renaissance with The Little Mermaid? And for me, that it will always be Fantasia. Joseph Green says, I recently got my first Kindle. Oh my. I've noticed that it is much harder for me to finish a book on the device. I spend a lot of time snooping in the store for something better and seem to be possessed by that feeling that I'm missing out on something. Any thoughts on the notion that tech changes the way we read? Oh, nice try. Nice try. But you're not talking about, there may be a case that tech changes the way we read. There are all sorts of interesting monographs and a couple of books on that subject, but you're not talking about the way tech changes the way we read. In the scenario that you describe, you're talking about you having no self-control, which came up in the last Q&A section, didn't it? So once again, you may have to, in the 21st century, you may have to Google that term, because not only have you never heard it in the wild, but any teacher or boss or advisor of yours, a coach of any kind, who has ever tried to mention that term is opening themselves up to an extensive lawsuit. What you're talking about here is a problem of self-control. Okay? It doesn't change the way you read. It's a problem of self-control. What you could do if you have trouble reading books, finishing books on your Kindle, you could try finishing books on your Kindle. Try controlling yourself so that you finish books on your Kindle. Get those muscles back into shape, or into shape for the first time, rather than blaming the device. Don't blame the device. It's your fault. Let's do one more. Joseph Green goes on. In these days of partisan politics and vitriol, where do you go for news? Do you follow traditional mainstream media outlets or look for independent sources? Substack appears to be an interesting place for journalists to share their work without mediation. It isn't. It appears that way because that's how they market themselves, but it isn't a place. There is no such thing as journalism presented without mediation. I go everywhere and do the mediation myself. If you're looking for a place to get your news where you can just sort of turn your critical faculties off and say, okay, I have now found my oasis, and anything that I find here, I can trust completely. You're just asking to be built. Don't do that, is what I'm saying. Instead, what I do, I don't know if it applied to you. You might not have the time or the willingness, but what I do is look everywhere. I go everywhere and then apply critical faculties myself, cross-check things against facts, things against data, things against each other. I find the process of doing that absolutely fascinating. I love it. So I would do it anyway. And doing that, realizing that I can't trust anyone. If the Trump administration, if the Trump years have taught us anything about mainstream media, it's that you can't trust them. You can't trust them at all. Now that I realize that more than ever, I did realize that during the Watergate era, and then I fell asleep for a long time. I let that go. Now I've learned it again, and I will never unlearn it. So now I love the process of figuring out what's going on myself, which is very different from buying into stupid conspiracy theories. Because that also is a way for you to check your critical faculties and just let someone else do your thinking for you. I prefer to dig in myself. So, early in the Trump administration, when everyone was saying that he was a bought and paid for tool of Russian interests, you had some of his defenders, including the odious Mike Pompeo, saying that he was harder on Russia than anybody, and citing specific things, specific policies, specific financial agreements, specific arrangements militarily elsewhere in the world. I heard that and thought, this was back when Trump apparatchiks were willing to go on national news programs. They aren't, and they stopped doing that right away. But I heard those specifics and thought, okay, well, that's not just somebody blathering. That's somebody citing things. So I can go and find those things and see whether or not there's any validity to that sort of thing. Is what I like to do now. Okay, so that's Joseph Green, and that's out of time. So we're going to go on to number 3 now. I'll be right back.